podcast is in town. Bringing hope is pretty cheer. The youth of Sierra Leone, we're here. Middle's Youth Podcast, come and see. Empowering dreams, setting minds free. Together we grow, together we thrive. With Middle's Youth Podcast, we come alive. We're talking dreams and future plans.
Hello everyone, welcome to Middle's Youth Podcast. I'm your host, Milton Kombamonde. On today's episode, we'll be discussing on a very reflective topic: what have Sierra Leoneans gained of 63 years independence? I'm here with Mr. Feyi Asgill. You're welcome.
Thank you.
So, tell viewers a bit about yourself.
Okay, my name is Feyi Asgill. I'm a retired employee of the Bank of Sierra Leone. My background was in economics, and I served in the Bank of Sierra Leone for over 30 years in the areas of economics and administration.
Okay, so how do you feel in being part of this podcast show?
Well, I'm honored and delighted to have the opportunity to take part in this podcast, and I commend Milton on the initiative to take a stop check of what has gone on in Sierra Leone over the last 60 years.
Okay, Uncle Feyi. So let's delve more into our topic.
Yeah.
What do you know about the topic?
Well, a fair bit. I was around. I was in secondary school when independence was gained, and I remember taking part in a march past at the stadium, which was then the recreational grounds, and it was a very hectic and exciting time in Sierra Leone.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what factor contributed to Sierra Leone gaining independence from colonial rule?
Well, I would say this was a policy decision of the British government itself. You know, for just over 20 years before that, Britain had come from a long world war, the 1939 to 45 war, and it drained the British Empire of manpower and a lot of resources. So to continue with the empire, they would have had to secure extra manpower from somewhere else, and even to run their own country, Britain, they had started taking people from the empire, from the West Indies, from Asia and Africa to help run their infrastructure, to build their roads, to rebuild their railways, to man important places.
Okay. So considering Sierra Leone's socio-economic and political background in today's time, where do you think Sierra Leone would have been if not for independence? If we were still under the colonial rule, where do you think we would have been by now?
I would say very much where we were before colonial rule, because education was limited in those days. During colonial days, education was limited to the numbers that were required to run the country at the junior levels, because the senior positions were reserved for whites only, and they only provided education up to primary school level for a significant number of people, and at secondary and higher levels, it was very few people who got there because they didn't need them in the higher levels of administration or in engineering or any of that kind of thing. So we would have had to struggle um, uh, with providing the resources for our own education.
Okay. So who were the prominent figures that played major role for Sierra Leone to gain independence?
Well, it started long before independence. You had people like Baibure, the Chimney Warrior, the people in the south who participated in the hot tax war. Um, you also had prominent academics, lawyers, and journalists who were clamoring for independence. The names of people like Wallace Johnson, Lamina Sanko, and Herbert Macaulay, and people from the provincial assembly, late paramount, many of the then paramount chiefs who had managed to get some degree of education. Independence was a result of the decision by the British government. It was not that we did not put up resistance. We did put up resistance. There was friction already between the qualified or the qualified Sierra Leoneans and their British superiors, because some of these Sierra Leoneans had higher qualifications and longer experience than their British counterparts. So friction was already starting, and that level of friction would have escalated um, uh, sooner or later, because more and more people were getting educated, and the eyes of the local people were being opened with the advent of radio and television, and the wider circulation of international newspapers, and with increased travel from those who were Sierra Leoneans who were lucky to have gone abroad for study.
When reflecting on Sierra Leone's journey since independence, what pivotal moments stand out to you?
Okay, some of the more prominent ones include the expansion of Ruby College University. It was then just a college under Durham University in Britain, and initially it was elevated to the status of a university college, and and by the end of the 1960s, uh, it had started awarding its own degrees. It had been converted to the University of Sierra Leone. And shortly after, the Njala University, Njala College, which was a teacher training and agricultural college, was also elevated to university status. Njala was initially uh, attached to an American university, I think the University of Illinois. On independence, there was a rapid Africanization of the public service, what we call the civil service in those days. Uh, a lot of qualified or graduate people were elevated to head departments and ministries. We started having Sierra Leonean permanent secretaries and Sierra Leonean heads of departments, and district commissioners to man positions in the provinces. And also, even in commerce and industry, you had Sierra Leoneans taking up management positions, both here in Freetown and up country, manning the provincial stations where goods are being procured for export, and where the importers, major importers, had branches in the provinces.
Okay. So we are now going a bit into civil society and grassroots organization. That's
Yeah.
why my next question will be coming from. How have grassroots movements, civil society organization, and youth initiative contributed to shaping the discourse around independence in Sierra Leone?
Well, it's increased awareness very greatly because the emergence of civil society groups made made it possible for discussion of topical issues to be brought to the level of grassroots people in various local communities were getting involved in topical issues, not merely politics at the national level, but um, uh, their own governance at community level and the issues that affected them as community citizens. You know, the schooling, the running of the hospitals, the maintenance of roads, the agricultural issues were all being discussed at local level.
Okay.
And
So
the collection of all of that, of all those community interests, tended to get a greater awareness of the national psyche of the identity of Sierra Leoneans as a nation.
okay. Because that's where my next question was coming from actually, but you've already answered that. So with all this, how has the political landscape evolved since independence, and how successive governments address or fail to address the needs of aspirations of Sierra Leonean, contributing to sentiment regarding independence?
Okay. Well, at independence, all the political interests at the time came together under what was called a national front, a national unity government. And it was that national front under Samuel Magai which went to London to negotiate with the British government for independence. Now, after the independence was granted, um, uh, and the position of chief minister was elevated to prime minister, then the the other party, after the first election, I would say in 1963, other parties began to coalesce. Some of the smaller parties faded out and were merged with, into bigger groups, because the SLPP is the only party that has evolved as one unit since independence up till now. But at in the groups which formed the national unity government at the time had all faded out. You had the United Progressive Party, you had the Sierra Leone Independence Movement, you had the um, uh, Provincial Assembly. All of those had faded out, and shortly after independence, we had the APC evolving as a political entity. But from then on, it has been a constant tussle. We've had several military interventions, mostly related to the conduct of elections or the access to national political power.
Okay, thank you. And when reflecting on Sierra Leone's journey since independence, what pivotal moments stand out to you, and how have they influenced the nation's current state?
Um, Everything was more or less coming together in one big pot boiling in one big pot. So it's difficult to separate the issues. But education, I think, is one of the areas where we have forged ahead massively. And then the issues of health also feature prominently. When I was going to school, you know, there were there were issues like infected toes and lacerated mouths. Symptoms of malnutrition. They were widespread, and in my days in primary school and even at part of secondary school, we went to school barefoot. We did not have footwear, but we were not expecting footwear. You only got that after you left school, or if you were lucky, sometime in Form 5 or after. Then also, I think the awareness of goods from abroad. There has been a lot of westernization. So that we are dealing with a lot of goods which we are probably previously unaware of in pre-colonial days or in the early colonial days. So radios, television, even electricity, because electricity and radio were very limited commodities, at independence. Very few households had these facilities, but these are the areas where expansion took place.
Okay. So, in terms of medical, education,
Yes,
infrastructure,
yes,
and all the other things you've mentioned
yeah,
from what you stated earlier on, comparing to other West African countries, as Sierra Leone was once the Athens of West Africa,
yeah.
do you think we are ahead or we are still much behind, or there is more that we can do to catch up with the rest of West African countries?
Well, what I can say is that the other West African countries caught up with us and overtook us. When at, during my time at Fobe College, the majority of the students were foreign. They came from Nigeria, from Ghana, from the Gambia, and even further afield from Southern African countries. Now, today, those countries have exceeded us in the number of universities and in the level of their um, uh, education and even application of technology. One thing I should mention was that the railway, the closure of the railway had a great impact, because the the railway facilitated the easy transportation of goods from provincial areas to the city. And when the railway was phased out, a lot of the richer agricultural areas um, uh, did not no longer had access to bulk transportation. They had to travel long distances on foot or with less than motorable transports to get to markets, so that the we lost a lot of goods that were coming from the provinces, and vice versa. The imported goods that were transported to those areas became scarcer in those areas.
Okay. Talking about the railway,
Yes,
which I think my generation are not opportune to see
yes.
or ride on, what are some of the most important things we are missing when we talk about railway in the agricultural sector and other sectors in this our own era?
Yeah, well, the railway afforded the opportunity for bulk transportation. When you're talking about several hundred bags of cacao and coffee, or truckloads of cassava and rice, it's not easy to transport those on lorries. When the railway was phased out, it was suggested that road transportation by road haulage by big lorries would replace them, but it really never happened. Only a few of these um, uh, road haulage facilities emerged, and then the roads were not there. The roads came much later and at a very, very gradual pace. So um, the people lost access to bulk transportation. Your palm oil in drums, your rice, bags of rice in bushels and 50-kilo bags. All those had made it easier to get to various parts of the country, not just to Freetown.
Okay. So what actually led to the closure of the railway?
Well, the thinking then, I was just a young employee of the Bank of Sierra Leone at the time. The thinking was that the railway was costing the government too much to run. Yeah, the railway was not making money, and it was a it was a heavy drain on the government, so that government was spending a lot of money to subsidize the railway, and people in the IMF and World Bank thought that the revenues we were collecting were not sufficient to perform the task. It's one thing to subsidize the railways. Railways are subsidized in many countries, but you have to have the capacity to do it. And we were lagging behind in that we were not raising enough revenue to cover all the other expenses in health, in education, in general administration, etc. And then the railway itself was taking up a large proportion of that budget. Through the World Bank then thought that it would be more practicable for us to um, replace the railway with a fleet of road haulage transport. But I recall that when President Shaka Stevens was leaving office, that was one statement he made. That was it. He regretted the decision to close the railway. He thought it was advice they should not have taken at the time. But the government was under pressure. They needed loans to augment the revenue which they were getting, and those loans would not have been forthcoming without their cooperation, let me call it that, without their cooperation with the IMF and World Bank authorities.
Okay, Uncle Feyi, thank you. I'm just saying, I'm imagining whether if we would have had the opportunity to get a railway again, what impact would that have created in our agricultural sector and other sectors, transportation of goods, as you've explained, from the rural areas to the urban area.
Oh,
Okay.
okay, carry on.
So, what are some of the gains we would have received in this our own era, if at all we will have still been able to maintain the operation of the railway?
Yes, I think agriculture would have had a great boost with the continuation of the railway, because more farmers would have expanded their production and gone to the market with it, and uh, at least those who were cut off from the railway would have been able to prosper, because they were they were getting prosperous farmers in those days, people who made money from selling their coffee and cocoa. Although the onset of alluvial diamond mining interfered with that to some extent during the 60s and 70s because people thought they could make more money um, uh, mining for diamonds than they were getting on their farms. But overall, the existence and improvement of the railways would have facilitated not just agriculture, but also the establishment of industries in provincial areas where they would have had access to the raw material which they needed.
Okay.
Imagine a fruit canning factory or even the breweries stationing their factories in the in places where they would have their raw materials, the fruits, the rice or or, or what's this soya or whatever they use as their ingredients for their um, uh, products.
Okay. So lastly about the railway before we close. I've heard so many stories about it, and from what I've heard,
Yeah,
even students used to rode on it from far distances
yeah,
to Freetown and
yeah.
back on a daily basis. How true is that, and what how did they enjoy? Were you opportune to also have the opportunity to ride from the railway to school and from school back then?
No, my own school was in the center, well, not in the center, but in Freetown, in the heart of Freetown. So I did not have cause to use the railway, but there were people like the Methodist pupils of the Methodist Boys High School. Um, uh, their school was transferred from center of Freetown at Vought Street to what is now called Kisimes Mess, the area between Kisi Village and Wellington Village, and arrangements were made for them to have access to the train from Water Street, um, uh, which conveyed them to their school daily. And there were people who were coming from the villages up in the western area from
Waterloo.
Hastings and Waterloo, who came to Freetown, who had to travel on the train to Freetown every morning and went back, and they had to leave their homes at uh, 5, 6 in the morning because they had to be on the train by 6 o'clock and to get to school on time, and then they in the evening at least by 4 o'clock they were on the trains again going home.
Okay.
Yes.
So
But
from
the way I enjoyed the railway was that during holiday time, we went up country on visits to relatives. I was able to travel to Bo, to Daru, and to Makeni.
okay.
Yeah,
So from this rich historical background of Sierra Leone
yeah,
and its culture,
yeah.
what are some of the lessons can other African nations learn from Sierra Leone's experience with independence, particularly in terms of governance, nation building, and post colonial development?
Well, other countries learning from Sierra Leone, I think it's more of the um, what I would call a reverse experience. We learn from the mistakes that we have made because we have had what I would call a tumultuous journey from independence to now in terms of political evolution. We've had several military coups. We've had an 11-year civil war, all of which interfered with the gradual development of the country, because essentially these were setbacks in our progress to nationhood and to economic prosperity. So what they can learn is that with peace and stability, they will be able to make much faster progress.
Right. And lastly,
Yeah.
is it true that Sierra Leone is on the flip side of success? That we enjoyed our success more early when we are under colonial rule than what we are currently enjoying as a nation?
Well, what we enjoyed in pre-colonial days was just preeminence, that we were the first to have the opportunity to have access to education and westernization, and the the fact that other countries have overtaken us is as a result of the immense resources they have poured into those areas. Our pace has been limited. What I can say is that during the colonial days, because Sierra Leoneans were the more educated people and were putting up more resistance the to British rule, we tended to be suppressed. If you Even if you take the levels of salaries of payments in the civil service, it was much higher in places like Ghana, Nigeria, and even the Gambia than it was here. So that our levels of income in comparison were was much lower. So we did not have the resources to pour into education and health and infrastructure as they had.
Thank you very much, Uncle Feyi. In as much as we would love to continue with this discussion, we'll find another time to bring you on Milo Youth Podcast
Okay.
so that we will have more discussion about Sierra Leone and the good old days. So what will be your final statement about what have Sierra Leoneans gained over 63 years of independence, which is our topic for today?
Well, I think we've gained a lot of awareness, from our interaction with the outside world. We have the opportunity to interact with leaders from many other countries, and in the international forums, the United Nations, and other international organizations, and that has increased not only our awareness but the opportunities for progress in spectacular ways. And the leaps we have made in education is also helping us to come to grips with the issues we have at hand.
Once again, thank you very much, Mr. Asgill, for being part of the Milo's Youth Podcast.
Well, thank you too.
Viewers, thank you for tuning in to this absorbing topic. With this, I would like to draw the curtains here, and until next time, this is Milo's Youth Podcast. Keep watching, keep subscribing, keep following and liking our posts. Thank you. Next time.